He has worked as senior economist for UNDP in Brazil and co-edited several books on the capability approach, such as Capabilities, Gender and Equality with Martha Nussbaum in 2014. We will ask the audience to submit all questions directly to me and Sophie by chat box only. During the session, the phones will be muted. And in case there are important clarification questions, we may briefly interrupt the speaker if there is a need. So, Flavio, thank you again. And you have around 35 minutes for your presentation in order to allow remaining time for Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for the invitation. I will put my alarm here to 30 minutes, so I will have 5 minutes to wrap up. I will also, can I just put my camera for a second? I don't know how to do that. Do you know how to do that? Let's see whether there's one just to say hello.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah?
Great. Great for everyone.
I cannot see anything, but can you?
We can see you.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the only thing, is just to say hello to everyone.
Sure.
Yeah, so, and to say it's a pleasure to be with you and to have this sort of discussion. So let me put the full screen now and let's see what I can do with GoToMeeting. Yeah, excellent. So can you all see the slide?
We can see your slides full screen. Perfect.
Yeah, very good. So I think my main motivation to choose this topic is because for many of the students I supervise, in particular in Cambridge, they always want to do some work using the capability approach. And after so many years that I've been working, and so many other colleagues have been working on the topic, I felt that we have not progressed dramatically. Let me put in these terms, using these words, in this field. So I thought that would be nice to go back, and by going back, I realized that my own thought about using capability indicators has changed. So let me start from the beginning and going to the next slide by suggesting that we do have a concrete practical problem that I see most of my students facing, but myself and so many other colleagues and researchers, which is the problem of going from a theory or an approach, if you prefer, but we can also talk about different theories and different approaches within the capability approach, into practice, into field work, into writing questions and organizing surveys and questionnaires. And I do think there's a big gap, there's a big leap there, which we still struggle with this problem. And I think we have a set of problems there. We started back in 2001 with this idea about how to operationalize the capability approach. And the conference we had with Professor Sen back in 2001, this word became the key word of the conference, how to operationalize. By that time, we understood that we had different strategies to operationalize the capability approach. It's not always with indicators that one would operationalize the approach. There are different things that can be done. But the question about building capability indicators remains, and it's amazing to see how many people they still go back to Sen's 1985 commodities and capabilities in search for some formalization. When I would like to suggest to you, Professor Sen himself has changed his mind about that particular formulation. Quite often, it's not simply the question of organizing surveys. It's the question about using secondary data. We all know that data costs money to produce. It's very expensive, even when people have to organize their own field work. So when they intend to interview 800, 1,000 people, even when they go to the field to interview 100 people, this might be expensive. So there's also this question about how to organize the data and how can we move from all this theoretical apparatus, which is very sophisticated, which takes time for people to use, into things that can be practical, that can be useful. So our point here today, I would like to suggest, our first and main issue is that there's an empirical gap. Other colleagues have suggested that recently, and despite all efforts, and it's important that we move into some clarification. Now, initially, academically, I put lots of references here, and then I thought, well, my friends will be unhappy with me. They will be perhaps not very happy. So let me repeat that I will mention their names as people who are not using properly, in my humble opinion, the capability approach. So I removed all names because I think I can convey the message that we are trapped into a situation of paying lip service to the capability approach. That's why you are probably seeing many different lips and doing different things. I think is very difficult to avoid, and quite often, because I have co-edited so many books on the capability approach where this has happened, and as a matter of fact, it always happens. There are people who simply put the word capabilities there. They use information that they would have used anyway to do their work. There are colleagues who are using that information anyway to do their work, but they call it capabilities, and it seems that things will be different only because we are calling them capabilities. I understand that by using the concept, one wishes to interact with what Sen, Nussbaum, and a good group of people they are discussing. So I understand the value of using the expression for or in order to interact with a certain community. But in empirical terms, if it has to add value, it has as well to bring something different. It's not simply by interacting with a certain community that empirically that would add value, although that has value in itself. So initially, so let me go back again to 2001 when we had the first conference in Cambridge with Sen, and the book that we produced after many years with the best papers of that conference. Let me mention that for me, and I'm only talking about my understanding here, I'm not disputing what other people are doing or have done. For me, when we talk about capabilities, we needed to get right, both at a conceptual and practical level, the issues that involve talking about capabilities. It's important to go back to what Professor Sen has suggested that is the main motivation for using capabilities. Partially is the issue that within utilitarianism, people were trapped within Lionel Robbins' critique back in 1938 that we could not make aggregate judgments because we cannot get inside people's minds to see their utilities and see how to compare these utilities to talk about poverty and inequality and other issues that demand some collective judgment. So by moving away from subjective information, what he tried to do with the capability approach, I would like to suggest, is to get concrete ways in which we can make this sort of comparisons, objective ways. So the characteristic of objectivity is quite important to define capabilities. Now back to functionings and back to the notion of beings and doings. There are things that are objective, and because they are objective, we can aggregate. Because they are objective, they overcome, at least partially, the problem of adaptive preferences, which is just one among many different ways in which subjective metrics can distort our valuational exercises. But it's also about not having a mechanical way of making these judgments. It's about a valuational foundation in which we make discretionary assessments. It's about the importance of particulars, as Nussbaum would say. But if we simply apply something mechanic in order to build these capability indicators, we are not actually exercising our judgment to that particular situation. We are not identifying how some dimensions are non-commensurable. And we might well end up working with a representative agent, and will not recognize the human diversity that is relevant to that particular context. But of course, because we don't want to stick simply to beings and doings and to functionings, but we want to move into capabilities, we have to talk about potentials. And potentials, they do have a counterfactual nature because they can be exercised or not. So I think facing these conceptual challenges, it's important in order to define what indicators are actually fitting this description. Indicators that can be diverse and non-commensurable. Another way of talking about that is to say that they are plural, they are not part of a mechanical exercise, they are objective, and they reflect potentials. Of course, when we move from the conceptual level into the practical level, we will end up discussing multidimensionality, weighing, incompleteness, which is something really undervalued, I would like to suggest in all this discussion. And this should be tackled. So going back, I still think that when we talk about capability indicators, we should take more seriously what we understand. We should not simply go with subjective indicators saying, oh, that's what I had or we had available. That's what we could find. Well, let's move this way. Because we are not overcoming the sort of problems that Sen and Nussbaum and many other colleagues have discussed when they have introduced the capability approach as an alternative. So, and I'm very glad to go back to that during our question time. But more recently, and I'm just mentioning some recent work I did for UNDP, by revisiting Sen's and Nussbaum approaches, I would like to suggest that the first step for going into a framework for indicators is actually choosing one of them. There are different approaches, and they have different characteristics. There are different ways of building the indicators. They have different views of the good, of the possibility of talking about the notion of a good life. Sen emphasizes much more the notion of process, and that's why we have capability in the singular. And Nussbaum has a view about what is a good life, what's a life with dignity, and is a life with some multidimensional way of understanding life. So that's why it's capabilities in the plural. So there are different strategies for doing that. I'm going to explore here with you Sen's view. It's not because I don't like Nussbaum's view, quite the opposite. I think she brings very, very interesting things. That's what I have suggested in this paper below recently to UNDP, that they should take much more seriously Nussbaum's approach, because she brings a micro dimension to development. She talks about the workplace, about families, about the households, about children playing, about things that are part of our daily lives, that Sen is not concerned with that. Nussbaum is also very much interested in changing people's ways of viewing their lives and cultivating emotions, using her words, cultivating political emotions, also using a title of her recent books, one of her recent books. So I think there are lots of interesting things, but it's not simply about getting her list, not even respecting multiple realizability of the list as she advocates in Women and Human Development, page 77. It's not simply by getting the list that we are solving that. So I understand that many colleagues have done that, and I respect they have done what seemed to be possible for them at that time. But Nussbaum is suggesting something which is a little bit more complex than that. But in order to understand Sen, my claim to you is that the capability approach is not a full approach. It's not a complete approach. The capability approach is about plurality in informational spaces. So that's all you get. And I think Muzafer Kizilbash, in his 2007 paper, when he's distinguishing between the thin and the thick view of the capability approach, he specifies that as well. He says, look, the capability approach is part of the story, but it's not Sen's broader framework. And I think we are very fortunate to have more recently with the revised edition of Collective Choice and Social Welfare, the possibility of understanding this broader approach. Of course, Sen put it forward so many times, and the idea of justice, chapter 4, for instance, is there when he talks about social choice. But I think now things are getting much clearer than they were before. And I would like to suggest to you that we can work with three main characteristics that other people have discussed, characteristics that other people use as well. But I think the first point is pluralism. Pluralism means that we should work with different informational spaces. It's not about replacing one space with another space. So it's not simply the question of saying, oh, resources, they play no role, or subjective information plays no role. First, because this is not true. Sen has never argued that resources are unimportant. What he said repeatedly is that resources are imperfect indicators of human well-being. We cannot reduce everything to resources because resources are converted differently according to different people. So it's about human diversity. Similarly, he has never advocated that we have something like the HDI ranking. So we have a full ranking, a full ordering, or a complete ordering, if you prefer. But that came more clearly in the idea of justice as well, the importance of comparative analysis, although he has advocated that back in 1970. The notion of partial comparability. We might not be able to rank and to have indicators that are telling everything about everyone at the same time, but we might have indicators that reflect intersection of rankings or partial rankings or even meta rankings. So it's a very interesting discussion about meta rankings. And all of these will be part of what he and Nussbaum as well have put forward, and they have called as reasoned scrutiny. And it's again against mechanical judgments. Now, Sen has spoken a lot about positional objectivity, and I think his 93 paper would be the best reference for that. But it's about using parametrically the indicators. I'm going to develop this thing further, but what I would like to suggest that the first step in order to use indicators is not simply, well, give me a question. You are with your friends in the pub and, well, give me a question. I'm going to see these people in this, well, developing country and, well, give me a question. It's not about a question. It's about the way you are going to organize your approach, the way you are going to organize different informational spaces. Now, I very much like his 1974 discussion, even Rational Fools, which was 76, 77, when he introduced the notion of meta ranking. It's not simply about having indicators, but it's about considering the different importance of different informational spaces for the problem that we are discussing. And it's about justifying these different informational spaces. And that links with some theoretical or philosophical discussions. Why Sen, for instance, he disagrees with Rawls about the priority of the first principle. We shouldn't have a mechanical priority of Rawls' first principle because we shouldn't have anything mechanical, according to him. So it's the question about working with different informational spaces. I would like to suggest to you that we have four main spaces: resources, subjective well-being, rights, and capabilities. Now, capabilities, we can also talk about functionings there, And when we are talking about rights, not all of them are about human rights. They can be general rights for different sorts of things. And even in terms of subjective well-being, there are different categories of subjective well-being. But just to try to organize that. So the idea of the framework that I would like to suggest to you is the idea of bringing all these different things together. And I thought that inspired by these truth tables, we can have something similar. So think about a situation where we are evaluating the advantage of a person or the advantage of a group of people. And I think it's interesting to note that whenever Professor Sen wants to talk about a bigger concept, we know there's a distinction between well-being and agency. So well-being is not the ultimate concept for Professor Sen. He uses the word advantage. So if from the perspective of the resources, that position is good or is true. If rights are true, they are okay. If subjective well-being, it's also high. And if capabilities are high, we could say, and we would be in a very comfortable position of saying that that person or group of people would be in a total or be in a true position of advantage. But what about if only subjective well-being and all the other informational spaces, they don't convey, if they clash, if they don't convey the same information, then I think we would be in a position of adaptive preferences. And that's his problem. I think his problem is not, as we have done with the book I have co-edited with Luigino Bruni and Mauricio Pugno, Capabilities and Happiness. Sen wrote the first chapter. He and Tadashi Hirai has done so much work on that as well. Subjective information has a role. The problem is if we put our framework entirely in terms of subjective information. If we only have subjective indicators, we have no anchor for that. So, and would be working with one dimension, one sort of information. But if we are in a position where the resources are true and all the others are false, I think we have the challenge of the conversion issues. We can have economic growth, but the poor might not benefit from that. We can have people with resources, but they don't know how to convert that into capabilities, and they are not even happy with the sort of resources they have, or they might feel miserable. So when we talk about nutrition problems today, is not simply about hunger and undernutrition, it's about overweight and obesity as well. So the issue of conversion, it's very important. We might be trapped in a resourcist, as I would call, framework. Similarly, if we had only rights as a true dimension here, the rights would be empty, as both Sen and Nussbaum have argued before. Now, of course, what is more interesting is the situation where only the capability informational space would indicate that the person is in a position of advantage, but all the other would convey a different information. I think in this case, we would have many different challenges. The challenges of if they are unconnected with rights, we might dispute whether the valuational or normative exercise behind the selection of valuable capabilities is there. We would question whether without resources or without adequate resources that would be feasible at all, and whether unrelated to subjective well-being, how people would value that. So I think that we have a set of different things, but what I would like to suggest to you is that we have to work with all different informational spaces together. And there are different ways or different strategies in which we can work with them. We can think logically and we can think empirically. about working with these different informational spaces. And I was trying to classify the idea of dimensions being isomorphic. If we just think in terms of set theory, they would convey the same sort of ranking. They would convey the same sort of information. But the whole beauty of a pluralistic approach comes out of this lack of isomorphic, what a word, structure that these different dimensions give. That's why we move into multidimensionality. So working with different informational spaces is about organizing these spaces. And I think if we have an opportunity to structure a survey, our survey should have the initial set of questions, which are our control variables. We'll ask about gender and race and education and these variables that normally we attribute to them any explanatory powers, but they are normally the same. They perhaps should not be the same, but they are normally the same. But once we do that, using a capability framework within SAN's social choice approach, I think would comprise us collecting information about resources, about rights, about subjective well-being and capabilities. Of course, when it comes to capabilities, the question is how can we do that? And I'm going to talk more about that, giving some illustrations about things I have done in the past. I cannot propose things that would fit you, but I can try to explain the things that I thought in order to come with these capabilities or capability variables. But the main issue here is that having this pluralistic structure, and once the pluralistic structure is there, to engage into the second criteria that I suggested to you, which is about comparative analysis. And this comparative analysis does not have to be limited to full rankings, but it can move beyond that, can move in the direction of meta rankings, partial rankings, intersection of rankings. I have done this exercise in the past using a software, and we found out that if we are serious about partial rankings, we should not have 4 groups. I was going to say 4 in Portuguese. We don't have 4 groups of people. 4 groups of people. We don't have 4 groups of countries. Sorry, in the HDI, but we will have 9 or more due to the non-commensurabilities we have only with 4 different dimensions and variables. We have 3 dimensions and we have 4 variables for the HDI. So it's important that the analytical structure extends beyond the pluralistic structure. And when SAN talks about capabilities, he's only talking about this pluralistic structure. He doesn't talk about comparability. Comparability comes from his social choice framework. He doesn't talk about full rankings when we are discussing the capability approach. So it's very important to see how capabilities fit his broader framework. But what are capabilities? I thought the best way of talking about capabilities, and I understand here that I don't have much time, so let's see. Yeah, I probably have 7 minutes. So the best thing is to give examples. So what I would like to suggest is that when I was doing, I was working for UNDP and doing the Brazilian Human Development Report, we had a national consultation, so we followed this bottom-up strategy for collecting indicators, and people said that the most important thing for the country were human values. So we did a report on human values. And when we had to move into policy making, we thought about how the different dimensions of the HDI would be related to values, what health and education and even earning and living has to do with values. So we went back to the notion of maximization and the act of choice, because the process of choice matters, And we built this human values index, which was about the processes. And we try to understand in the provision of health and education and earning a living, I repeat, how people would face different challenges. So some of these indicators were about people feeling respected. Other indicators were about people understanding what doctors are saying, and we found out that 30% of people don't understand what doctors say, partially because doctors don't care much about what people understand. So there are questions that could only be captured by functionings. We have no way in this exercise, although we related that to resources, we related that to subjective well-being, but we didn't have capabilities as potential. But when we were doing the report I coordinated the report for Panama, the human development report for Panama, we had the theme of child development. So everything was about potential. It was very straightforward and easy to give to children some sort of exercise they had to do where they would unveil their cognitive and non-cognitive capabilities. And we could use these capabilities as measures of their potentials. It might well be that a child would have this sort of spatial cognitive development, so would be able to keep things in her mind and do maths. But if she would go back to school and would not have even a math teacher, she will not be able to develop this potential, but the potential was there. So we had the possibility of using more fully capabilities together with other informational spaces to get an idea about the future, about the counterfactual nature of capabilities. The same thing we did for Criança Esperança. This name doesn't make sense in Portuguese as well. Criança is children and Esperança is hope. And it's a project with UNESCO and Globo TV in Brazil. And what we did is that by using a little bit of James Heckman and Nussbaum and using SENS framework as well, we put some indicators there which were about cognitive development. So it's a sort of straightforward way and to link with issues related to how subjectively people would understand the development of their children. We interviewed parents as well, how the resources were converting into different sorts of capability development, so one could understand how the manager of the project could allocate resources in order to explore more the potential that children had. And similar work we did for this project with Teen, in which we had a webinar with Professor Sen and Bob and Ellen Kaplan, who created this method for teaching mathematics to younger children, which is a very serious problem for many developing countries with a very strong gender bias, because people say that mathematics is only for boys and is not for girls. And from the beginning, we find these gaps in performances in terms of math achievement that they take to their whole lives and even to the labor markets after that. So what we did was the same exercise of measuring potentials. How can we do that? How can we measure potentials? Partially, we can do that with cognitive variables and non-cognitive variables, but also by talking about aspirations, also by identifying how people value things and what are the things that are important for them. And in this exercise, we moved beyond pure subjective information. Partially, the problem with subjective information is that we don't have an anchor. It's not simply the fact that people can be optimistic or pessimistic about the answers. We can correct that, and psychologists can correct that, but it's the fact that they might choose a different variable in order to answer your question, whether they are happy or unhappy about a certain thing. So what we did with this project is that we explored the different potentialities that children could achieve. How to do that is very much context dependent. You need to study and to delve into the theory that is related to a particular project, to a particular action. So it's very much an anthropological exercise at the beginning, which was the thing we did for Natura. It was a human development index at an individual level. And then we very much used some of the information from the Measure of America. It was a human development report, I think the only one done for a developed country, for the US. And we got some variables that are about lifestyles, about things that people are able to be and to do in their daily lives, things that will shape the opportunities they will have in the future, but also the quality of life they have related to the use of time. So I am aware that I don't have much time, so probably my time is over. Is that correct? Hello?
I think you
Yes, hi.
have another. It's
So 1 minute.
Yeah, two minutes left, I guess.
2 minutes. Yeah. 2 minutes just for conclusion. So the first thing I told you is about the gap. I think that we do have this empirical gap. We do have this problem, and we need to acknowledge this problem, because if we don't, we'll carry on as usual, business as usual, using whatever thing and paying lip service to the capability approach, which I think is part of the problem. But how to do that? I think there are two alternatives. We have to recognize we do have two different approaches. And for Sen, as far as Professor Sen's framework is concerned, I think the capability approach is not an approach per se. It's just about plurality in using informational spaces. It's not about having a survey in which all variables will be capability variables, but it's about confronting in a comparative way different informational spaces, building narratives where we are able to identify problems with subjective space, problems with about how resources are converted, problems about not having valuational judgments for using capabilities as expressions of human rights. I think this is the richness of the approach, but we have to face non-commensurabilities in doing that, and they are very much context specific. That's why I have mentioned some illustrations, some examples, but I'm very glad to engage with you and to be able to elaborate on that. So thank you very much for listening to what I had to say.
Well, thank you so much, Flavio. This was great. Fantastic presentation. I think we have a first, Marcelo, you wanted to
Yes.
ask the first question?
Yes, thank you so much, Flavio. It's not actually a closed question. I found it so useful to get rid of this idea that only capabilities matter and to move into that wider perspective that the four spaces can exist together and provide more add plurality in the model. So I was just, of course, that renders a lot of question on how can that be operationalized. I would just, I'm quite happy with the examples you gave. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on how that matches with the composite indicators and the need to have a single index for the sake of simplicity in order to communicate with governments or with companies. Many times we do have to build one index. We cannot specifically talk about meta rankings or anything more complex than a single list. So I would love to hear your comments on or opinion on that.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Marcelo. I think simplicity is the name of the game. So I fully agree with you, and simplicity is important for a very straightforward reason, is that simplicity is necessary for people to engage with the information that indicators might convey. So simplicity is necessary because public reasoning, or public reason if you prefer, is important, is key for development. Now, my understanding is that Professor Sen's critique of economic growth is not because growth is unimportant, it's because growth has become a sort of mechanical way of assessing human well-being without people's voices. So simplicity is important because that's the things that people will remember. That's why Adam Smith suggested in the History of Astronomy, when he wrote that we should divide our papers into 3 parts, because it's simple. People might remember that if we suggest a simple structure. And similarly, that's why we have the HDI only with these 3 dimensions, and we don't have 10, we don't have 20. Now, not everyone would understand that. And we have seen, I have seen so many indicators in my life with 10, 20 dimensions. I'll put another one. I have even seen for sustainability, I have seen with 50, 70 variables before. So I fully agree. But at the same time, we should emphasize that indicators, they're about the things that we consider acceptable and unacceptable. Indicators should indicate. Variables are not indicators if they don't have thresholds, if they don't have a clear message about above or below a certain level. These things are not good. Of course, you can get that information by comparing indicators, even if you don't have thresholds, but simply by comparing, and you say, oh no, how does it happen that that person or that country is with that indicator and my indicator is different? So, but I fully agree, and but I don't think that would discard the use of meta rankings, for instance, because meta ranking is simple. It's just we have 3 dimensions, and you choose the one that's most important in order to organize the others. So there's a valuational exercise there. That's the main difference. But I fully agree, and I think this goes well with a broader pluralistic understanding of indicators.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Let me entertain. I'm reading the questions from the chat. There is one question about aspirations. The question is, aren't aspirations also subject to the problem of adaptive preferences?
Yeah, they are. But aspirations are functionings per se. I remember when we did this work for UNESCO, the Criança Esperança, in Brazil, one of the main problems we have in Rio is that people who live in favelas, they never leave favelas. So they are just a lift away from people who live in Ipanema in Brazil. They are the place where the rich and the beautiful are. And then you have, well, a lift to Cantagalo, and people from Cantagalo, they say, well, we live here, we stay here. So the aspiration of looking for a job, the aspiration for living one day together with the others, when they are so close, that's the dramatic thing. When they are so close, it's a very important, this aspiration, it's a functioning itself. So if we are able to detect the presence of this aspiration, I would say this is a functioning and can become a capability. Of course, it depends on how you ask the question, because if simply about being happy or unhappy with a certain aspiration, that could be phrased in a certain way that is simply about subjective information. So you don't know what's the reason that people will say 10 or 1 to your question. So aspiration is a very interesting category, because aspirations can be used both as a functioning and as subjective information, in my view.
Perfect.
Yeah, I have there is another question. There's perhaps a clarification question from Willem, who is asking about the objective indicators, and he's asking if it's, do you mean not self-reported, or do you mean independent of people's valuation?
Yeah, very good. I think nothing should be independent from people's evaluation about things that are important. But let me give you one example. Sam talks about riding a bicycle, I think, in commodities and capabilities. I relate to that because when I was 10, I got a bicycle as a Christmas present, but I couldn't ride. I didn't know how to ride a bicycle, and I had to wait for 1 year to be able to go to the beach and then have an opportunity, have space to try to or start learning how to ride a bicycle. So if an economist would go to my house and would try to assess my well-being, would say, oh, you have a bicycle. Yeah, so there you go. So you're a happy person. Or someone could go there and actually ask me about how happy I was. And initially I would say very happy on the day that I got the present, but after a month that I knew that I wouldn't have the opportunity to go outside to the beach to learn or even to a park. I didn't have a park close to my house. I would be unhappy. So there's some distortion there. But the actual human development was when someone rides a bicycle, when there's a functioning there. Is the riding the bicycle the real human development? Of course you need the resource. You need a bicycle, but I could have borrowed a bicycle. I didn't need to have one. And of course, subjective information is something that can be distorted according to when you would go there and when you would ask the question. So objectivity means the possibility of, for us to aggregate. We can say that this thing, everyone in the same position, that's why Sam's 1993 paper on positional objectivity is so important. Everyone in that condition will be able to see the same thing, will be able to verify the same thing. Either someone is, I don't know, tall or not. Either someone has, I don't know, a blood test and lacks, I don't know, iron, or not a child. Either, well, if we can say, either children can do certain things or not, and even people. So objectivity is an important characteristic, but we can have several objective things that we might be able to do, and they might have different relevance to our lives. So the fact that they are objective means one thing, means that given the same position, we are able to affirm, to assert the same thing, but they might have different relevance to our lives. So valuational exercises can go together with different objective valuations.
Great. So I'm going to perhaps ask you two more questions if you have the time. I mean, there are two outstanding questions. I had one, and that is very similar to what Oscar just asked. So it was very helpful indeed to hear about your 4 information spaces: resources, subjective well-being, rights, and capabilities. And scholars using the capability approach often stress capabilities. Well, how do capabilities relate to other things? And especially, I mean, where do you, often we do not have information on capabilities. We have information on functionings. So do you put functionings as a subpart of your capabilities space? And yeah, so that's the first question. And then the second question is about methodology. A question from Rosa. Rosa is asking if you have any thought about qualitative methods to operationalize the capability approach. This is what Rosa uses in her research, and she's curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, very good. I think yes. First, when I talk about functionings and capabilities are simply sets of functionings. Capabilities are For instance, and I can think about poor children. Some poor children, they can only think because school fails them. They can only think in Latin America and in Brazil, they can only think about becoming football players. And one day they will have a sort of trial in one important football club and they will fail, or they might become part of large schemes of drug trafficking. And I think other people who are born in different socio-economic contexts, they could say, well, I can become a doctor, I can become a lawyer. My father is A and B and C, and my mother D and E and F, and the whole family and people they know. So I think capabilities might be sets of functionings. But having said that, I think that we might measure potentials directly. When I talk about cognitive development, temporal and spatial cognitive development, let me tell you that for just one illustration, for spatial cognitive development, I have done that in the past, and psychologists do the same sort of thing. They give different parts of an animal to children, and they ask which animal is that. And the child has to put the animal in her mind together in order to identify. And that's the same sort of capability that, or potential that's necessary in order to do mathematics. For instance, you have to see 1 + 1, you have to see it. It has to be in front of you. If numbers get bigger, you lose this ability. But the fact is that this is a potential that you could use for different things. So yeah, I do think that functionings are part of the same space of capabilities, but I do think that capabilities can be measured directly as well. And I think confronting with different informational spaces, in the previous example I gave, is about a bicycle. A bicycle is at the same time a resource. I can have a subjective view. I can see whether riding a bicycle is anything related to a right I might have as a child or not, or be totally unrelated, or can be actually functions and capabilities. And riding a bicycle is very interesting because it's a functioning, it's actually riding the bicycle, but the skill you have is a capability. You might exercise or not later. People say you never forget how to ride a bicycle, and that might be a good example as well for a capability that does not depreciate. Now, in terms of qualitative methods, it's a different discussion about indicators, but it's a very interesting question. And I think it's totally, fully compatible with what both Sen and Nussbaum, they have advocated. And I have one student, for instance, just to illustrate, one student from Cambridge, she's Brazilian, Caroline Souza, and she's doing an ethnographic study. She's spending time in 3 schools in Brazil, seeing what is going on there in schools. But even being there in a sort of ethnographic study, she's paying attention to things that people are being and doing. She's paying attention to the resources. She's paying attention to how they feel, to their subjective well-being. She's paying attention to things related to their rights, even to the rights of children inside the school environment. So you can do something qualitative, but the question remains that what sort of information would you take into account? How you're going to confront this different information? Perhaps I have not emphasized enough, but they are different kinds of information. There is nothing that might prevent us from using even other dimensions, other informational spaces. This would be totally compatible with the social choice framework within the capability approach that Sen has put forward. But the main issue here is that even in the qualitative exercise, which I think we should give due importance to that, but even in this exercise, we might confront the issue about how we bring together different informational spaces and all these different problems like adaptive preferences, conversion, the issue of valuational exercises, they will emerge.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We are out of time. So I'm going to conclude and extend our thank you, Flavio, for giving this webinar. It was extremely enlightening, I would say, in terms of your setting the capability approach and social choice theory into and enlightening us around both. So thank you so much, Marcelo.
Pleasure, great fun.
Yeah.
And thank you all for attending and being so good about staying muted, and we had no interruption. It was very smooth. So thank you all, and stay tuned. We're going to have more of these webinars organized by the Graduate Student Network and the Thematic Group Network. So stay tuned, and hopefully you can join us for some other webinar later this year. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.